Today is a Sunday. I don't have any commitments today, so I'm going to spend the day in the garden. Before it gets too hot, I'm going to do a lot of pruning in the greenhouse. I need to level out my bench. I've got pavers I need to put it on. I just haven't taken the time to empty out around, on, and underneath it to make that happen. We're getting to the point where it's kind of necessary. I also really need to weed the outside garden beds, tie up the tomatoes out there because they're getting about a foot high. So, and then when it gets too hot, I'll probably shift to cleaning a bunch of my spent containers so I can reuse those and not transmit any diseases. And if there's time, I will try to work on the compost pile, but realistic expectations. We're gonna try. Okay. So I have twined up tomatoes, watermelons, cucumbers, squashes, and I've trimmed for airflow, which meant that I got a side bonus of herbs. So I've got chives, winter savory, and oregano that I'm going to bring in the house, and some lettuce. Those things I'm going to set up for drying or putting in the fridge, because the next thing I have to tackle is the Wonderberry forest. I don't think I was prepared for those to get as large as they are. I might rip out whole plants. We'll see. So yeah, let's show you what I've done. So over here, I removed any sad looking leaves on this nasturtium. I've ripped out a lot of the little Johnny jump ups that were in this corner so that I could prioritize peppers. I still have some flowers over here, obviously, with the mini rose and the nasturtium. So this is the hot pepper area. They are looking pretty good. New leaves are having some aphids. However, it's the time of year where the predators for those are going to come out in force pretty soon. This is my pink banana squash that I've been waiting on forever, and persistence pays off. So I went ahead and tied up its second shoot, but it's got one vine going this way. It's almost up to my shoulders, so that's, I think, pretty exciting. But I've trimmed this closer to the base for any large leaves, to help with airflow, trying to make sure there's not any pest or disease pressure near the base. I removed any dying flowers that weren't turning into fruit, and I trimmed back pretty heavily this winter savory here. I left a little bit over here because I do want it to trail over the edge when it comes back. We've got enough time in the season for me to get multiple harvests out of that. The rosemary I've left alone so it can continue getting bigger. And then the chamomile here, which you can see starting to flower, is trimmed up along the edges just so he's not taking over his neighbors. The feverfew is starting to come up and get flowers now. I did get another eggplant from the farmer's market because hers were much taller than mine, so that is a Rosita. And my calendula is starting to flower, and that is so soft and beautiful. And then we move into sweet pepper territory. So these are all the sweet peppers. I trimmed back the oreganos here, again, just for airflow, so a heavier prune on this side and a less prune on this side, if any. And then I've got another squash plant that I trimmed, again, close to the base. And then I've got peas, which I'm pretty sure it's going to get too hot for these shortly. But underneath them, I started cucamelons. So when the peas are done, the cucamelons will take over. So then on the north side, I've got cucumbers that are twining up. I had let the tomatoes get away from me a little bit, so I had several shoots that were coming out of the arms that I had to trim off. And then I trimmed a bunch of leaves for airflow. And you can see that my second sowing of sunrise tomatoes, these are determinates, are coming up, and pretty soon I'll also trellis those. But other than that, I've got basils underneath, a couple different sowings of that, some alyssum in the back so I can get some beneficial bugs back there, the chives, more lettuce, and then the cucamelons that I've been training up, training being pretty loose because they are doing most of it on their own. So these are the cucamelons, these cute little vines. And so far, it looks like my dream of getting 2 crops out of one space is gonna work. I've got more basils underneath here, more cucamelons at the base of that tomato. That tomato is getting big. That's exciting. I've even got cucamelons in the back on those tomatoes. I guess it's a bit unsurprising to notice that the tomatoes in the back are not getting as tall as their neighbors. Given that my greenhouse is not taller on that side, that's probably pretty good anyway, even if it's not on purpose. And now I need to tackle that mess. So I've got the stabby tomatoes in here with the white flowers, and then all of the rest of this is Wonderberries. These are autumn leeks going to flower. And then I've got okra and soybeans coming up over here. So, before it gets too much hotter, we're inching towards 10 a.m. where it's going to be too hot in the greenhouse. I'm going to take the herbs I harvested inside, get a little bowl for the Wonderberries, and I'm probably going to have to prune those pretty heavily or take whole plants out, but getting there. Yeah. Okay. I got a little yogurt wee container to put my available Wonderberries in. The forest is a little thick, so I can't quite see how many there will be. I don't expect that I'll fill this container. We'll find out. But I have herbs going in the dehydrator and some left out for fresh eating for stir fries. And yeah, it's about to get too warm to be in here. So I'm going to try and hurry this process along. All right, the Wonderberry forest has been thinned out, so now I can see if there is fruit in there that's ripe for picking. I got a few of these guys, but the reason I thinned this out so heavily is, well, for a couple things, honestly. So I've never grown Wonderberries before, so I wasn't sure what the growth pattern would look like. And I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking at like a mature plant online to see. But the reason I pruned heavily is 1, airflow. I don't want to risk any further fungal diseases. 2, the Wonderberries are not my primary crop here. They just outpaced the primary crop. Again, because I haven't grown them, I wasn't sure how quickly they would grow, what their growth pattern would look like. It turns out they grow a little bit like tomatillos, with like the branching pattern. So one stem will branch off and it'll make a whole new stem, and so you'll just get successive waves of this, which is good news for getting Wonderberries. But what I want in here is actually okra, and I had 2 okra plants that I started from seed in this bed that were shaded out by the Wonderberries. So because I would prefer to get because I would prefer to get okra out of this space, I trimmed back the Wonderberries. Now I can see when the fruit's developing, I get good airflow, and my okra can grow to maturity. Because, oh, there were 3. there were 3 okra plants being shaded out. Maybe 4. There were too many okra being shaded out. So I will show you the okra so that you know what I'm talking about. So this back here is an okra, and so is this one, and back there, and back there, there's a couple okra. But you'll notice these okra, so there, those are growing way better. You can probably see it most easily by these two that are pretty close together. So the one on the right was more shaded than the one on the left. So the okra needs sun, and so do the Wonderberries. So in order to be able to enjoy some Wonderberries before the ones outside of the greenhouse come to maturity, I've just heavily pruned this back. I started with removing the oldest leaves, so the biggest, because the majority of plants do most of their photosynthesis through their younger leaves, and as those mature, new ones come and take over. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a pretty good guideline. So yeah, because I'd intended for the Wonderberries to be an understory crop, so growing underneath the okra, it just kind of made sense to prune those back pretty heavily, because I do want okra. And usually in my grow zone, by the time the plants get big enough to start producing a good amount of pods, it's time to yank them out. So starting them in the greenhouse so that I can have okra longer. What's interesting is that in another week I will be starting fall seeds, as well as succession sowing some more things. So because I have today to my own devices, I'm really just going to see how far I can get making the garden space a little bit more organized, tidy, manageable, because pretty soon it's going to explode. I started filming the rest of this yesterday, which at the time of filming was Sunday. Yeah, today is Monday. I did some weeding in the garden beds this morning. I need to finish that task tonight. So the list for yesterday got interrupted because we had some weird weather with just thunderstorms popping up, and they were strange because they started coming over my yard from like the north, and it was a little burst of thunderstorms, and then it dissipated and I came out and I'm like, okay, cool. And then I looked to the east and there was like a wall of clouds, and I went, or not. So yeah, we had one of my bosses called them popcorn storms most of yesterday afternoon, I assume because they just keep popping up. That sort of disrupted my plans. So with the ground being too wet, which I'm not going to complain about, rain is welcome, I did not finish weeding yesterday, but I did get through half of the containers I needed to clean that were just used, and I needed to clean and then store. So half of that task is done. Tonight I'm going to finish weeding, and it wasn't until I saw the time lapse for May that I realized that there really has been a lot of change since I did a garden tour. So I owe you a garden tour. It'll probably be for early June, and then we'll do one again at maybe towards the end of June. It depends. But yeah, tonight I'm gonna finish weeding. It was honestly better to be weeding this morning when it was like 70 degrees, because now it's 87, and in the greenhouse it's like darn near 100. It's gross. I am a zone 4 gardener, and anything above 80 just kind of makes me go ugh. Turn that temperature down. But it's not snowing, and I only get a few months of that, so I should probably just suck it up and kind of deal with it. And the warm weather and all the rain is making all the plants happy, so yeah, fair trade-off. I better get to weeding though. Okay, so weeding took longer than I thought, mostly because I was optimistic about my timeline. That's a common problem for me, at least. So there's a couple things worth noting. The straw mulch that I put down absolutely had grass seeds in it, so the mulch was growing some grass. However, it was rooted into the mulch, so it was really easy to pick out. And it might make some wonder why you would put down mulch at all if it was just going to be adding weed seeds to your garden area. So there's a couple choices for this. By putting the mulch on top of the soil, you are maintaining a moisture level, which keeps the soil much lighter and easier to work with. And if you are not putting down the mulch, it becomes really hard packed, much more difficult to pull roots out. So when you're weeding, you're going to weed more often because you're never really getting the roots out. So I choose to lay mulch down because it keeps the soil structure much more workable, keeps the moisture level at a level that the plants appreciate, and it makes weeding easier for me. That's also true in the mulch pathways. I had a bunch of weeds that I was able to pull the whole root out. Not all of them, but more than not. So mulched pathways, also really important. Due to the amount of time it takes me to haul trailer loads of mulch to my property, and chip drop doesn't really seem to cater to my area, which is kind of disappointing. But the long-term plan is to have like some sort of rock or aggregate instead of mulch in the pathways. That's a ways out. So in the meantime, I'm adding to my soil health. So if I change my garden structure, garden plan for the garden beds, it'll be easy to just understand that I have good soil to work with underneath. So, yeah, weeding for the week is done. Typically I break weeding up into more tolerable amounts, so that it's easier to keep up on. So I'll usually do the main garden bed to the west on its own, and then I'll do the kennel bed over by the dog kennel along with the herb circle, as well as now the bed in front of the greenhouse behind me here on the south side. I'll do those in another day, and then I'll get the greenhouse on another day. So main garden, kennel bed, herb circle area outside of the greenhouse, and then inside the greenhouse, and then I usually do the pathways. Sometimes I'm able to do the pathways on the same day that I'm doing those other 3 areas, and I just keep that as a cycle. So on the downside, I'm never really done weeding, but on the plus side, it's never really like 4 to 6 hours of my life. So if I do it in portions, it's only like an hour or 2 at a time, and I'm able to keep up on it throughout the season without becoming exhausted. So yeah, food for thought when you're doing your own weeding, because as you garden, it's going to be a thing. Early on in my learning about gardening, I wasn't sure what was a weed and what wasn't, and I legitimately Googled the seedling for whatever I knew I'd planted in that area, so I knew what that looked like instead of the weed. And if it didn't look like the seedling, I pulled it. So if you're just starting out on your journey and you're not sure what's a plant and what's a weed, I highly recommend that you leverage the internet and Google the seedling picture for what you are aware you planted in that spot. You might still make mistakes, because I absolutely pulled up a leek earlier when I thought it was grass, but it had a very distinct onion smell, and I went, whoops. So it'll recover or it won't. Yeah. So you'll make mistakes, but best you can do is learn from it. Break down your task into manageable portions, and keep on keeping on. Thanks for hanging out with me.